sat on the throne, lost in thought. The room was dark, but a ray of light illuminated him, almost like he was the only thing that mattered. Meanwhile, the man was grinning like a maniac, even with all the blood covering his face. He looked absolutely thrilled. The man in the armor stood over the bodies of his enemies, a sinister aura surrounding him. The attacker spoke, boasting that it was pretty warm and cozy, and that he had put a lot of money into making that trap. The figure stood tall, an axe in his hand, with a blazing fire behind him. The attacker seemed unfazed by the heat, like he was born in the flames. The attacker stared intensely, his eyes piercing through the helmet. He asked if the other person liked it, clearly proud of the trap he had set. The wounded man, covered in blood, couldn't believe what he was hearing. He stammered, asking if Ghislaine was the garbage he thought he was. He wanted to know if Ghislaine had known his plans all along. Far below, Ghislaine stood silent over the bodies. Ghislaine continued, explaining that he also knew how many of them there were, who the spies were, and who had helped them with reinforcements. He knew everything, it seemed. Ghislaine declared that he had known it all from the start. He said that there was no way they could win, because he'd always been a hidden ace card. The wounded man screamed, asking how Ghislaine could dare to do this. He was furious that someone he considered an useless piece of trash would even think about doing this to him. Ghislaine's axe was already falling. Ghislaine told him to shut it. The axe had already fallen, and the man's life was over. Ghislaine's helmet fell to the ground as he declared that they could try invading as many times as they wanted. He vowed that he was going to win the war every single time. Ghislaine smiled, knowing he had already won. He asked if they knew why he was so confident, and then he explained that it was because he had all the plans. A year before, near the Perdiem estate in the Luthania kingdom, tents were set up. It was a time before the fall, before everything changed. Suddenly, Ghislaine was lying in a bed, gasping for air. He was completely disoriented and asked himself what had just happened. Ghislaine sat up, clutching his chest in disbelief. He couldn't understand how he was still alive, and he asked himself if it was real. Ghislaine's eyes widened, his face contorted in disbelief. He started to say that just a moment ago, the sword dropped from his grasp, clattering against the ground. It was over before he even realized it. Blood splattered across Ghislaine's face as he realized what had happened. He just muttered, "Shoot." Ghislaine was bleeding out on the battlefield. He thought to himself that this was how it was going to end for Ghislaine Perdiem, the mercenary king, one of the continent's 7 strongest men. The war was over, and Eden, one of the continent's top 7 noble knights, stood over him with a smile. He had won. The enemy stood over Ghislaine, sword raised high, ready to strike. Ghislaine, lying in the dirt, could only think it was a shame he wasn't able to get his revenge. The enemy sneered down at Ghislaine, calling him a sickening bastard. He spat out the words, "Mercenary King Ghislaine Perdiem," like they were nothing but garbage. The enemy admitted he hadn't expected Ghislaine to be the oldest son of the fallen Perdiem household. He asked how Ghislaine knew all this, considering he was from a different kingdom. The enemy scoffed, saying that of course he knew. He admitted he'd worked his tail off a long time ago trying to track Ghislaine down. The enemy grinned, revealing that they were the ones who worked with the Delphine household to bring down Ghislaine's family. He looked absolutely proud of it. Ghislaine looked up in shock, blood dripping down his face. He demanded to know if there were other people involved besides Duke Delphine's household. The enemy stood over Ghislaine, looking down at him with a cold stare. He said there was no point in explaining anything since Ghislaine was about to die anyway, and told him to just accept his fate. Ghislaine looked absolutely furious, his face covered in blood and dirt. He shouted that he would never forgive the enemy for what he'd done. The enemy raised his sword high above his head, the blade glinting in the light. He was ready to end Ghislaine's life. Right there. He remembered the sword coming down, how he was fallen in that moment, but somehow he was back in his younger body, sitting in a tub with his head still on his shoulders. Ghislaine looked around, completely lost. He wondered if what he'd experienced was just a hallucination, and realized he was back in his younger body. Ghislaine wondered if he had been captured and used as a lab rat by mages. He looked absolutely furious, promising to make those arrogant jerks regret having kept him alive. Just then, someone called out to him, calling him young master. Ricardo, a soldier of the Perdiem family, called out, asking the young master to come out. He knew that Ghislaine was awake. Ricardo suddenly held a finger to his lips, telling someone to be quiet. He looked serious. His eyes narrowed. Ricardo held his sword up to Ghislaine's neck, telling him that he'd let him live if he answered his questions. Or maybe not, he thought. Ricardo looked down at Ghislaine, holding the sword closer to his neck. Ricardo asked if Ghislaine thought he was crossing the line, since a no was a no. Ricardo was clearly confused by Ghislaine's calm reaction. Ricardo was starting to panic. He was confused as hell by Ghislaine's reaction. He wondered why Ghislaine was so calm when he was being threatened with a sword. Ricardo suddenly punched Ghislaine in the face. Ghislaine stumbled back, completely shocked. Ricardo explained that Ghislaine had tired himself out from his tantrum earlier and fell asleep. Ghislaine was even more confused, wondering if he really did that. Ricardo looked down at Ghislaine, whose face was a mask of confusion. Ricardo said that Ghislaine had been throwing a tantrum about how he was going to command the group to raid the orcs. Ghislaine was still trying to process what Ricardo was saying. Ghislaine was getting annoyed, calling the whole thing nonsense. Ricardo told him to get his stuff together because people were waiting. Ghislaine was still lost, wondering where they were even going. Ricardo told Ghislaine that they were going to the Perdium estate, of course. Ghislaine didn't seem to understand what was going on, but Ricardo didn't seem to care. Ghislaine was completely lost. He just stared ahead, mouth open, trying to process what Ricardo had just said. Ghislaine asked Ricardo to repeat himself, shocked by what he had just heard. Ricardo was getting annoyed, asking if Ghislaine was sorry for throwing a tantrum earlier. Finally, they arrived. Ghislaine stood on a small hill, staring down at the Perdium estate in the distance. Ghislaine was absolutely floored. He couldn't believe that it really was the Perdium estate. He remembered seeing it reduced to ashes, so why was it still standing? Ricardo smacked Ghislaine across the face, asking if he had a terrible nightmare or something. He couldn't believe Ghislaine was calling his own household a fallen one, since the Count would kick him out if he heard that. Ricardo wondered if he was dreaming right now. Ghislaine just took the hit, and muttered that he guessed he wasn't dreaming. The sting on his cheek was a painful reminder that this was real. Ghislaine's mind raced as he saw his younger face and the estate in its original state. It was like looking at a broken mirror, reflecting two different realities. Suddenly, it hit him. He had traveled back to the past. The realization sent a shiver down his spine. Ghislaine remembered how his younger self resented the household. The immaturity and feelings of being inferior led to trouble, and as time passed, more people from the household avoided him. Ghislaine remembered that he couldn't handle all the criticism back then, so he ran away from home. He was just a kid, after all. Turns out, Ghislaine became a mercenary after that. He fought in tons of battles, got stronger, and made a name for himself. Ghislaine continued, remembering that he returned to the Ferdium County to fix his past mistakes. But when he got back, his household had already been destroyed, and he lost everything. But now, it was all still standing right in front of him. The Perdium flag waved in the wind, untouched. Ghislaine was so happy that all the people he cared about were still there. He couldn't believe it, and he felt like singing out of joy. Ghislaine knew it was too early to celebrate. He remembered that they were supposed to raid the orcs, and he knew he couldn't forget that day. It was the day most of the raid squad would die. He remembered the scene of the raid. Bodies were scattered everywhere, covered in blood and dirt. It was a massacre. Ghislaine recalled that in his past life, he had followed the orc raid squad, hoping to make a name for himself. At that time, the report said there were only 3 orcs, but when they got there were more than 20 orcs waiting for them. Almost everyone ended up dying because Ghislaine had been stubborn and wanted to command the squad. Ghislaine figured it should be doable enough, since those orcs didn't really have a strategy. The problem was whether these guys would trust him, since they all thought he was some useless scumbag. Ghislaine smirked, looking up at the scaffolding that had just been destroyed. He seemed almost happy about the destruction around him. The soldiers were caught completely off guard. They shouted that it was the orcs, their voices full of fear. The orcs were already upon them, axes raised and ready to strike. The soldiers screamed that the orcs were here, but it was too late. Ghislaine looked surprised, almost caught off guard. He wondered if the orcs had arrived this quickly in his past life as well. The orcs started tearing through the soldiers, leaving a trail of blood and bodies. It was a brutal scene, just like Ghislaine remembered. Raid Squad Commander Scovin shouted for everyone to get into formation. He ordered them not to panic and to get into a defense formation immediately. An orc swung its massive axe, taking out multiple soldiers with one swing. They didn't even have time to scream before they went flying. One of the soldiers realized they had let their guard down. He was pissed that they were getting ambushed when they weren't prepared at all. He shouted that there were way more orcs than they had been told, and at this rate, they were all gonna die. Another soldier screamed that there was an orc right behind Commander Scovin. The orc was already raising its weapon, ready to strike. The orc's axe smashed into the ground with incredible force, right where Scovin had been standing just a moment before. The ground cracked from the impact. The orc's axe was coming down fast, and Commander Scovin knew he couldn't dodge it. He braced himself for the hit, closing his eyes. Suddenly, Scovin heard a sound that made him open his eyes. At the same time, Ghislaine was moving at lightning speed, taking on the orc. Scovin couldn't believe what he was seeing and called out, "Young master?" Ghislaine was a blur of motion, his sword slicing through the orc like it was nothing. The monster didn't even have time to react. The orc collapsed in pieces, and Ghislaine was covered in its blood. He didn't even flinch. The man yelled, completely stunned. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Ghislaine stood his ground, looking down at the remains of the orc. The monster was torn to pieces. Ghislaine looked at his hand, annoyed. He realized he couldn't use mana yet. He wished he had traveled back to the past sooner. Ghislaine looked down at the commander and demanded that he hand something over. "You're the commander, right? Give it." Commander Skovan looked up at Ghislaine, completely confused. "Sorry," he asked. Commander Skovan straightened up, looking directly at Ghislaine. He seemed to be trying to understand what was happening. Ghislaine looked down at the soldier, then declared that he wanted the right to command. He was serious, not joking around. Raid Squad Commander Skovan looked absolutely shocked. What? He asked himself. How could Ghislaine ask for command at a time like this, when soldiers were dying? Ghislaine just stared back, looking a little stunned himself. He realized that he couldn't just take command like that. Skovan looked back at him, completely speechless. Skovan asked if Ghislaine thought this was some kind of game, even if he was the young master. Skovan said he couldn't just give up the authority that the Lord gave him so easily. Meanwhile, Ghislaine looked annoyed by Skovan's words. Suddenly, a massive orc came charging at them, swinging its axe. It looked like they didn't have time to argue, not with that monster bearing down on them. The armored man yelled at Ghislaine to fall back. He added that Ghislaine was still too inexperienced to lead the troops, so he should just stay out of the way. Ghislaine looked down, feeling a bit annoyed. He guessed he had no choice but to listen to the guy. Ghislaine suddenly punched the armored man right in the face. The guy went flying backwards from the force of the blow. Ghislaine's punch sent the armored man stumbling backwards, and immediately the man yelled at Ghislaine, asking what he thought he was doing. The armored man looked completely confused. He didn't understand why Ghislaine would attack him like that. The sword pierced right through the orc's head, killing it instantly. The massive creature teetered for a moment, before finally collapsing. The orc's body crashed to the ground, a sign of victory in this battle, and immediately, the nearby soldiers stared in disbelief at the fallen monster. Ghislaine looked at Skovan, clearly thinking about something important. He asked Skovan if he knew what the most important thing in battle was. Ghislaine continued, explaining that there was no hope of winning a battle when the troops were filled with fear. The soldiers looked nervous, wondering what he was gonna do. Ghislaine's eyes flashed with determination as he spoke. He declared that they needed to gain momentum, a smirk playing on his lips. Ghislaine held up a hand, silencing the nervous soldiers. He needed them focused, not panicking. Ghislaine didn't wait for their fear to take root. He leaped over the heads of several orcs, getting the jump on them. He spun through the air, sword flashing. Orcs fell left and right, their blood splattering the ground. Ghislaine stared down at his sword, now dripping with orc blood. He yelled for the orcs to come at him. Ghislaine's eyes burned with rage as he scanned the remaining orcs. He promised he was going to kill every last one of them. Ghislaine was surrounded. He spun, his sword a blur, desperately trying to keep the orcs at bay. Each swing was a gamble, a desperate attempt to survive. He didn't let up. Ghislaine sashed at an orc, the blade tearing through its flesh. Blood splattered as the orc roared in pain, but there were so many more. One of the orcs watched the young master fight. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He thought to himself, am I dreaming? Even as a mana user, it's hard for me to do anything. So how is that skinny young master doing all of this? Ghislaine was starting to feel it. Sweat poured down his face, and his muscles burned. He was getting tired. He was pushing himself to the limit. But Ghislaine wasn't just swinging wildly. He was using the smallest of moves to dodge attacks, and using his superior swordship to strike at their weak spots. Ghislaine had the skill of a manaless swordmaster. It was as if a red aura was starting to surround him. The orc looked surprised at Ghislaine's strength. Ghislaine shouted that he still wasn't warmed up, asking if that was all they had. Ghislaine taunted them, saying they weren't living up to their reputation as a warrior species. He then started running away, as all of them charged at him. The soldiers watched the young master run away, and one of them asked if he was really running. Another soldier shouted for the commander. The commander looked absolutely furious. He wondered what the hell Ghislaine was thinking. Ghislaine was running into the group of orcs and drawing their attention, which seemed like a good move, but running away now, and in that direction, it was the edge of a cliff. He was leading them straight to it. The commander's eyes went wide. Wait, a cliff? He finally understood what the young master was planning. The commander shouted, telling the troops to raise a shield wall. As he gave the order, the soldiers quickly formed ranks, raising their shields in unison. One of the soldiers shouted that they would follow the first son. They were ready to follow Ghislaine into whatever crazy plan he had. Ghislaine was still fighting the orcs, leading them closer and closer closer to the cliff's edge. The situation was getting pretty dangerous, but he didn't seem to care at all. Ghislaine told Scoven he was sure he had figured out what his plan was. If he was a skilled commander, he admitted he would have preferred to take them all down himself, but his stamina just wasn't up to it. Because of that, the orcs were getting pushed closer and closer to the edge of the cliff. Ghislaine smirked, saying that even with his low stamina, it should be enough for them to handle. The orcs screamed as they were pushed over the cliff, falling down to what was surely their deaths. The soldiers used their shields to push the orcs over the edge. They were so close to the cliff now that the orcs had nowhere to go. Yes, Ghislaine smiled, clearly satisfied with how things were going. Everything was falling into place. High above, the orcs tumbled down the cliff, falling to their doom. At the same time, Ghislaine looked up at them, ready for what was next. The commander screamed at the troops to push the orcs off the cliff, and immediately they surged forward, shields raised. The orcs struggled against the soldiers, but there were too many of them. Meanwhile, the commander yelled, his face red with effort. The orcs fell from the cliff. They were screaming as they fell, their bodies twisting in the air. The orcs continued to plummet, their screams fading as they disappeared into the mist below. It was over. The explosion ripped through the last of the orcs, sending blood and body parts flying everywhere. Below, the soldiers cheered, exhausted but alive. They had managed to kill all those orcs, and they were happy about it. The soldiers started yelling for the young master. They were clearly worried about him. The young master was falling off the cliff, his body twisting in the air. It looked like he was done for. A soldier reached out, trying to grab the young master before he fell completely. He yelled at him to grab his hand. The young master looked up, but he couldn't reach. He just couldn't grab the soldier's hand. Ghislaine was falling, and there was nothing to grab onto. He yelled for someone to hold on. At the same time, below, one of the soldiers looked up in horror. The soldiers all yelled out, calling for the young master. They were scared he was gonna die. A small voice called out, just barely audible. It was Elena. She was calling for Ghislaine, her voice full of worry. Ghislaine looked up, his eyes widening. He could have sworn he heard Elena's voice. Elena? He thought. The reflection of Elena appeared in broken shards. She asked if their mom was gone, thanking Ghislaine. Then she asked what was wrong with him these days, saying he was the worst. Ghislaine stood alone, lost in the darkness. He looked down at his open palm, his expression unreadable. Ghislaine muttered that these were his memories of Elena. At the same time, someone punched him in the face. Young Elena was reaching out and asked to go together. Tears streamed down her face. Ghislaine woke up with a start, sweat dripping down his forehead. He stared blankly at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what just happened. Ghislaine woke up in a bed, inside a familiar room. He was alive. It seemed like they had saved him. He sat up, rubbing his forehead. Was that all just a dream? His entire body ached. It had to be the consequence of pushing his body to the limit. Well, I guess it made it easier to know that he was still alive. Suddenly, a voice called out, "Master?" Belinda rushed into the room, looking relieved. Ghislaine looked at her, confused. "You're awake, Belinda." Belinda hugged Ghislaine tightly, asking if he knew how worried she was. She wondered if they should have let the soldiers handle the orcs. She was clearly relieved to see him alive. Belinda asked what he was doing and if she had done something wrong. Ghislaine told her no, he was just glad to see her, his personal tutor. Since he was little, she was the only one who continued to stay by his side, despite his idiotic antics. But after the family fell to ruins and she went missing, he was no longer able to see her again. He remembered her shoe being left behind. Ghislaine thought he never thought he'd get to see her like this again. He wondered why she was so happy when they saw each other every day. He needed to tell Belinda the truth. Ghislaine told Belinda to listen to him carefully, because a catastrophe would soon strike Ferdium. Belinda was confused and asked what he was saying. The truth was, Ghislaine told Belinda that he died and came back to life. Belinda didn't believe him for a second, joking that a cat almost killed him. Ghislaine was frustrated and tried to explain that he wasn't talking about that and that Ferdium was in grave danger. Belinda scolded Ghislaine, warning that if he kept making a scene like this, he'd end up in jail. He realized that she didn't believe him, so this wasn't going to work. Belinda asked him what he would have done if he was too hurt to even go to the festival. Belinda reminded him about the festival, asking if he already forgot about it. She explained that Lady Elena had been waiting for the day to go to the festival with him, clearly trying to cheer him up. Belinda said it would be a great chance for the two of them to become close to each other again. Ghislaine remembered that there was a festival that always happened around this time of year, and he stared at the picture of Elena. Ghislaine thought thought that in his past life, he didn't have time to enjoy festivals because of his traumatic experience. He sat alone in the dark, regretting his actions. Belinda wondered how long it would be until the festival. She figured it was about a week away. Ghislaine's mind was racing as he thought about that week. The day that changed his life kept replaying in his head. He remembered Elena asking if he was inside, a memory that continued to haunt him. He remembered Elena begging him to go with her. Her eyes were filled with tears as she reached out to him. Ghislaine knew that 1 week later, Elena would die. He was determined to change that future, no matter what it took. Ghislaine suddenly pulled Elena into a hug. She was caught off guard by the sudden closeness. Belinda was furious, her face red with anger. "What's wrong with you? What kind of prank is this?" she demanded to know. Below, Elena looked up at Ghislaine, confused by Belinda's outburst. Ghislaine looked down at Elena with a soft smile. He quietly said that he had missed her. Elena, clearly creeped out, pushed Ghislaine away with surprising force. "Let me go! You're creeping me out!" she shouted. Ghislaine stumbled back, shocked by her strength. He wondered if she had always been this strong. Belinda stepped forward, her expression still hard. She stated that she was the one who asked Elena to be there. She then demanded to know what game Ghislaine was playing, and if he thought this made everything okay. Ghislaine looked confused, asking what she was referring to. Ghislaine, looking absolutely furious, yelled that he told her to get lost because she was annoying. He added that just feeling her breath felt disgusting. Elena looked at him shocked as he realized he had said all that out loud. Ghislaine suddenly looked calmer, but also ashamed. He quietly admitted that he wasn't the closest with Elena in his past life, and that he had been a complete piece of trash. He quickly apologized. Belinda, holding Elena, looked completely stunned. She asked if Ghislaine had apologized first, and if he had hit his head after she heard an orc had taken him out. Ghislaine insisted that he really had taken them all out. Below, he looked absolutely pissed and demanded to know why they kept implying that he had gotten hit. Elena sarcastically said that he had gotten them in that state, and that he had come back unconscious. She told him to come on now. Belinda and Elena were both smiling brightly, clearly enjoying each other's company. Meanwhile, Ghislaine was kneeling on the floor, filled with regret. Ghislaine stared ahead, his expression hardening. He thought to himself that everyone was as he remembered them, and wondered why the past version of himself had wasted so much time on useless things. Ghislaine remembered the festival that was coming the next week. He recalled that he had rejected Elena's offer to go together, making up some excuse that the events from the raid squad had upset him. That was the last time Ghislaine had seen her. He remembered that Elena's body was later found shredded to pieces, along with her bodyguards. Below, the brutal scene of the massacre was still fresh in his mind. Ghislaine clenched his fist, his knuckles turning white. He thought he should have been with her, no matter what. Ghislaine was kneeling on the ground, looking up at them. He asked if they could head inside. 2 guards in full armor stood at attention. They announced that Miss Elena had arrived. These were her bodyguards, Jamal and Philip. Belinda asked Elena if something had happened to her that she had to wait outside. She apologized, explaining that the servants had asked Elena to oversee their work on the festival supplies. She wondered why they would ask Elena to do that. Below, Ghislaine looked up, confused and concerned. Belinda told Ghislaine that he wouldn't know anything anyway, because he always lazed around all day. She wondered why there was such a shortage of workers in Ferdium that even the young lady needed to work. She then said she was heading out, and that Ghislaine should take care of himself. She added that she didn't care about these things back then, so it was obvious that she didn't know. Meanwhile, Elena walked away with her bodyguards. Ghislaine stood up, looking determined. He offered to help as well. Elena looked up, clearly confused by his offer. Belinda wondered if Ghislaine had really gotten hit in the head. Why else would he volunteer to help? The market square was bustling with activity as people set up stalls and prepared for the festival. Servants hurried around, carrying supplies and decorations. Ghislaine shouted that he had offered to help and for them to get out of his way. He added that people would be too scared to work with them around and that they should stay out of trouble. Below, workers continued to set up for the festival, trying to ignore the commotion. Ghislaine realized that Elena's body would be found near the slums, far from the festival grounds. Someone must have killed her there or forcibly moved her there. Because of that, he knew he needed to learn the layout of the castle to prevent it. Ghislaine winced, holding his face. One of the servants looked at him, concerned, and exclaimed, "Ghislaine, my lord, that face." Old man Fergus seemed relieved to see Ghislaine. He was thankful that Ghislaine was well. He said that he had come as soon as he heard the news about the orcs, but that they could stop talking about it now. At the same time, Ghislaine leaned on him for support. Belinda said that it was great timing, and that old man Fergus should take Ghislaine back to his room, since he was acting weird after waking up. Old man Fergus agreed that he would. Ghislaine thought that this this damned hooligan image was getting in his way again. Ghislaine figured that it couldn't be helped. He'd get to know what was going on around the castle better in the following week. Ghislaine asked Old Man Fergus if there was an abandoned training field in the castle and told him to take him there. Old Man Fergus was confused and asked why. Ghislaine simply said that he wanted to train. Old Man Fergus seemed surprised by his request. Old Man Fergus agreed to take him there. He said that it was this way. Ghislaine's eyes widened as he took in the sight before him. He was clearly surprised by what he was seeing. Ghislaine looked around the training area, impressed. He said, "What? It's in a much better condition than I expected." Ghislaine thought that it was a perfectly suitable location to train at. He had never seen anything like this as a mercenary. Old Man Fergus replied that they kept it maintained in case he wished to use these facilities. Old Man Fergus looked at him with a small smile. He said that he was certain that what Ghislaine was going through was just a phase. Ghislaine stared at Old Man Fergus, lost in thought. He wondered if Old Man Fergus had also acted this way in his past life. Ghislaine looked down, lost in his thoughts. So that's what had happened, he thought to himself. Ghislaine said he needed to live a long life because dying really felt like trash. Old Man Fergus asked him to beg his pardon, since he was said to have already experienced life and death. Ghislaine smirked, replying that Old Man Fergus was sharp and that he actually did die and was resurrected. Old Man Fergus responded that he thought that was enough tomfoolery, my lord. Ghislaine told Old Man Fergus that he could head back and that he was going to start training. He added that he would be just outside. Ghislaine thought to himself that he had always treated everyone around him like they were his enemies, but he realized he was just short-sighted back then. He was starting to regret his actions. Ghislaine thought about the week ahead. Back then, it was revealed that the one behind Elena's death was a lord from a neighboring territory. The war had dragged Perdium to its end, a dark flag waving over the destruction. And the thing is, Elena's death was the starting point of it all. That meant he had to set things straight, starting now. Ghislaine looked absolutely determined. He needed to fix everything from here on out. First things first, Ghislaine needed to get himself into better shape. It sucked that he didn't have a lot of time, but he should at least be able to control mana. Mana was a supernatural resource that allowed humans to break through their limits. Most people said that noticing and taking in the mana was the hardest part, but he was able to do that, even on the chaotic battlefield. Ghislaine had to connect the mana particles floating in the air and bundle them up as if he was spinning a spool. He focused, trying to feel the energy flow. Ghislaine sat there, mana swirling around him. He figured that for someone like him, who'd been through tens of thousands of battles, creating a mana core was a piece of cake. He wasn't just relying on talent, though. Ghislaine had a method from that half-burned book on magic that he picked up, and because of that, he was able to stand with the strongest 7 of the land. He was using the natural mana core of humans to his advantage. Ghislaine could create a second, and even a third. The power was flowing through him. He was creating a connected mesh of multiple cores. As a result, he could create an explosive force. The energy was almost too much to handle. Ghislaine coughed up blood as he kneeled down. 3 was his limit, for now anyway. Even though he was able to reach 5 in his past life, he stared at his hand, still covered in blood. This method allowed one to create an explosive force in a short time, but it also required an extremely large amount of mana. In return, it was a dangerous game he was playing. That loss to Idun still stung. It was the primary reason he had lost in his past life. He remembered bringing a whole Night Order to fight against him when he had run out of mana. He was sure he would have won if it was a fair fight. He clenched his fist, looking down. It was inherently an unstable technique, but this was enough for now. He had a youthful body and a lot of time now. He would get his revenge and take Idun's head this time. His face twisted in rage. Even those bastards standing behind House Delphine, who helped destroy their country, he would destroy them all. 1 week later, it was the day of the festival. The castle loomed in the distance, unaware of the storm about to break. Ghislaine tightened his sword belt, preparing for whatever might happen. He had a bad feeling about this festival, and he wasn't going to be caught off guard. Sword at his side, Ghislaine walked through the festival. People bustled around him, enjoying the festivities, but he was on high alert. He scanned the crowd, searching for any sign of danger. Suddenly, Elena stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes widened in surprise, and she stared directly at Ghislaine. Elena looked looked surprised to see him. She said, "Wow, you really came. What happened? You never come to these sorts of things." Ghislaine responded that, as a Perdium, he should at least come to festivals every once in a while. Elena narrowed her eyes, looking at him suspiciously. She told him he'd been acting real odd recently, and that she'd heard he'd been doing nothing but training in the past week. Elena asked what was so wrong about the next in line of a Knight family training. She didn't care about these kinds of things before. She reminded Ghislaine that he was the one who said their dad was annoying, and that he wished he was the Lord already. Elena smiled and said that she liked the way things were now. Ghislaine remained silent, listening to her every word. Elena looked at him, commenting that it seemed like the old him was back. Meanwhile, Ghislaine was lost in thought, considering his next move. Ghislaine realized something in the past week. He understood that his actions had changed, so his reception and the future were also slowly beginning to change. Belinda told the guards to figure it out themselves if the young master created trouble. She warned that they really couldn't afford to have any problems, especially with a lot of visitors. She told them not to worry. They could trust her. The general flow of things might be the same, but it was difficult to know how his actions would impact everything. He had to consider every possibility. Making good use of the information from the future was his job. Ghislaine knew he needed to respond to each situation effectively. Ghislaine's preparations were complete. He felt a surge of confidence. Everything was ready, and immediately, Ghislaine grabbed Elena's hand, and they ran together through the town. That was fun. The castle stood tall under the night sky. Ghislaine admitted that the festival was getting a little boring, since it was the same every year. He wondered if the reason nothing new had happened was because he was with Elena. The festival was almost over, but nothing special had happened yet. Ghislaine asked Elena if she wanted to check out other areas too. He knew from a friend that there were new events elsewhere. Elena seemed excited by the idea. Elena grabbed Ghislaine's hand, telling him that this better be fun. But then, someone spoke from behind them. Ghislaine turned around, staring at the person and wondering if it was them. The newcomers had a sinister look on their faces, closing in on Ghislaine and Elena. "The traitors of our house," they shouted, their voices filled with hate. The group of people moved closer, blocking any chance of escape. "We're here," one of them yelled, his eyes fixed on Ghislaine and Elena. The street was deserted, with no one around to help. The only sound was the wind whistling through the empty buildings. One of them scoffed, looking around with disgust. He wondered what this was all about, and if anyone would actually perform in a dump like this. He added that they probably weren't ready yet, and that people would be here soon. "Don't make me laugh. Would you want to perform in a place like this?" One of the men spoke, saying that this was all as expected. He said that this looked like a simple deserted street at first sight, but looking at the traces of chaos, he was checking the escape route. The armored man declared that preparations must have been made in advance. Ghislaine told Elena to go, but she wasn't having it. Elena refused to watch any show in a dump like this. The armored man asked if Elena worked out, wondering why she was so strong. Elena looked completely puzzled by the question. The armored man ordered them to wait a little longer. Below, Elena looked concerned, calling out Philip. Elena asked why they were acting so strange, clearly spooked. The armored man apologized, saying he didn't mean to scare her. The armored man said it was just that a reasonable request had come in. Elena looked shocked, asking what he meant by a request. They walked into the town square, but something felt wrong. There was a strange tension in the air, like they were walking into a trap. Suddenly, 3 cloaked figures appeared, walking towards them. The way they moved was unsettling, like they were gliding instead of walking. Frank stepped forward, his face partially hidden by his hat. He said that, as expected, their work process was clean. Frank continued, saying that they had brought the young lady, as promised, so they should end the deal right there. He seemed eager to get out of there. Frank looked confused, asking if that wasn't the eldest son of the Perdium family. He didn't think he had requested to bring him here. Below, Ghislaine stood next to Elena, looking unfazed. Frank smirked, saying he would just hand him over for free. He added that Ghislaine had followed them foolishly, not knowing this would be his graveyard. Down below, Ghislaine heard Frank accuse Jamal of selling them out, asking if he really thought he could get away with it. Frank smiled, telling them to worry about themselves first. He figured all they had to do was run away to a faraway place. He went on to say that they were just getting sick and tired of this impoverished land, tormented by the barbarians anyway. Frank was sure there were plenty of others leaving Perdium besides them, right? Ghislaine stood there, sword in hand. Frank looked shocked, unable to say anything. Elena watched as Ghislaine stood over Frank, who was now lying dead on the ground. Ghislaine declared that at least the others never sold them out. The attacker wondered how Jamal, that idiot, could lose to an amateur like that. Below, Jamal stared up in disbelief as a sword pierced right through his head. Jamal was stunned, unable to believe what was happening to him. It was impossible, he thought, as the sword went all the way through. Ghislaine stood next to Elena, looking down at Jamal Jamal's lifeless body. The rain started to fall, washing away the blood. The observers wondered if that was really the eldest son of Perdium. They thought he'd never had any real combat experience or fundamental training. Judging by his appearance, one of them thought he wasn't mistaken. Although they were taken off guard, Ghislaine instantly killed 2 knights. The observers realized that Ghislaine's attacks used mana. Ghislaine stood over Jamal's corpse, the sword still stuck in his head. Elena grabbed onto Ghislaine, clearly scared. She asked what the hell was going on. Ghislaine's face was blank, showing no emotion at all. He just stared ahead. Elena screamed, her voice full of terror. Ghislaine knocked Elena out cold, and immediately, a man thanked him for doing the work for them, calling him the eldest son of Perdium. Around the area, the knights lay dead on the ground. Meanwhile, the man with the pipe admitted that Ghislaine was much different than what he had heard. He wondered if he had been hiding his true skills. Ghislaine held his sword, the blade dripping with blood. He wondered aloud what it mattered to them. Below, he looked down at the men with a cold stare, muttering about the number of enemies. The man with the pipe stood with 2 other cloaked figures. He said that the 2 beside him were nothing, but the one in the middle had mana on a different level. Ghislaine knew he had to end this quickly. Meanwhile, below, he asked the group who had requested this hit. He figured there was no need for a dead man to know that. Ghislaine figured they wouldn't say it so easily. No matter, he thought. Ghislaine was sure that they would spill it soon enough anyway. The leader in the black cloak said that they shouldn't sever his head. Instead, they should capture him alive and break every limb in his body so that he couldn't help but go mad. The leader went on, saying that he had to writhe in pain for the shape to come out beautifully. He seemed to enjoy the thought. The leader's men shouted their agreement and charged forward. As a result, one of the attackers hit the eldest son of Perdium with a stick. The eldest son of Perdium realized it was a trap and shouted, "Firecracker!" He looked absolutely furious. The stick slammed into the eldest son of Perdium's face with full force. He was immediately swarmed by the attackers, who were all trying to take him down at once. The eldest son of Perdium deflected the blow with ease. He scoffed, saying it was a shallow trick. The eldest son of Perdium didn't give the attacker a chance to recover. He pressed forward, his sword a blur of motion as he aimed to end the fight quickly. The cloaked figure tried to block, but the eldest son of Perdium was too fast. His blade danced around the clumsy defense, searching for an opening. The eldest son of Perdium's sword found its mark, slicing through the air. Blood splattered as the cloaked figure stumbled backward, clutching at the wound. The eldest son of Perdium stared down at his fallen opponent. He looked absolutely furious. The eldest son of Perdium's attack crashed against the other man's defenses, sparks flying as their blades met. Below, the swords were locked in a stalemate, neither giving an inch. The attacker was clearly surprised that the eldest son of Perdium had managed to block his attack. He thought it was a perfect sneak attack too. The eldest son of Perdium didn't waste a second. He rushed forward, his swords aimed at the attacker. The eldest son of Perdium's swords moved faster than the eye could follow, each strike precise and deadly. As a result, the attacker was sent flying backward, blood splattering everywhere. The attacker's pipe went flying through the air, a clear sign of the force behind the eldest son of Perdium's blow. The eldest son of Perdium's sword came down with incredible force, ready to end the fight, but the attacker managed to block the strike at the last second, clearly surprised that he was still alive. The attacker was surprised he was still alive. If he hadn't been lacking in mana, he would have been beheaded just now. He wondered how the eldest son of Perdium had survived a strike to his neck. Had he focused his mana around his neck to reduce the damage? The attacker held his sword steady, ready for another strike. He had no clue how the eldest son of Perdium had learned such a strange swordsmanship at that age. The attacker grinned, revealing his scarred face. He declared that the eldest son of Perdium would die right there. The attacker was surrounded by a bright blue light, his mana flaring. He sneered, confident in his power. He told the eldest son of Perdium that there was no way he could beat him with such weak mana. The attacker's face was twisted with rage, his eye glowing with power. He was going to make sure the eldest son of Perdium died right there. The eldest son of Perdium grinned, holding his swords ready. He looked like he was actually enjoying himself. The attacker's eye widened, confused. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The eldest son of Perdium was smiling. Before the attacker could react, the eldest son of Perdium moved like lightning. The attacker was cut across the chest, blood spraying everywhere. Ghislaine didn't give the attacker a chance to recover. He unleashed a flurry of attacks, each strike aimed to disable. The attacker was bleeding, but he still had the nerve to talk. He told Ghislaine that his mana was too weak for any of this to work. Suddenly, the attacker coughed, blood splattering on the ground. He couldn't believe what was happening to him. him. The attacker was completely shocked. He couldn't understand how Ghislaine's attack had been so powerful. He realized that the true culprit behind Elena's death was standing right in front of him. Ghislaine was surrounded by a red glow, his eyes burning with rage. He told the attacker that he was the one he was looking for. Ghislaine's eyes burned with an intense light as he prepared to unleash his full power. He warned the attacker to brace himself because he was about to unleash his third core. The attacker was completely caught off guard by the sudden surge of power. He asked in disbelief how Ghislaine had managed to boost his mana so much, and immediately, Ghislaine attacked with incredible speed, daggers flashing. The attacker could barely keep up, realizing just how fast Ghislaine had become. Meanwhile, Ghislaine pressed his advantage, attacking with a flurry of sword strikes. The clash of steel echoed through the air as Ghislaine relentlessly attacked. Each strike was delivered with precision, forcing the attacker to struggle to defend himself. The attacker was struggling to block, exclaiming that the force of Ghislaine's attacks was making his hands go numb. He was starting to wonder how Ghislaine could draw so much mana, since it usually had a limited effect. Because of that, the attacker's sword started to crack under the force of Ghislaine's blows. The attacker was stunned, blocking Ghislaine's attacks with difficulty. He exclaimed that he had never heard of a method that could increase mana so explosively. The attacker continued to struggle to keep up with Ghislaine's attacks. He realized it was as if Ghislaine had become a completely different person. Ghislaine didn't give him a moment to breathe. He attacked with such force that the attacker's sword started to crack. Ghislaine pressed his attack, shards of the attacker's broken sword flying everywhere. He moved with incredible speed, not giving the attacker any chance to recover. Ghislaine stood over the attacker, who was now bleeding and defeated. The attacker was done for, with no hope of winning. Ghislaine didn't hold back, going all out against the attacker. Every strike was thrown with the full force of his body behind it, blood splattering everywhere. The attacker screamed in pain, blood gushing from his mouth, and immediately after, Ghislaine's fist slammed into his face, knocking him to the ground. Ghislaine stood over the attacker, ready to get some answers. He grabbed the attacker by the neck and asked him to finish their conversation from before, demanding to know who had requested this attack. The attacker was in bad shape, but he wasn't giving up just yet. He muttered that he wasn't going down so easily, his hand reaching for a hidden knife. The attacker, with a desperate look in his eyes, announced that he would at least take Elena Perdium with him. He raised the knife, aiming it at the young girl. The attacker screamed, trying to stab Ghislaine with the knife, but immediately after, red threads shot out, wrapping around the attacker's arm. Ghislaine grabbed the attacker, his eyes cold and unforgiving. He offered to make a deal, saying that if the attacker answered his question, he would sheathe his sword. The attacker realized he was trapped, unable to move. He wondered when Ghislaine had created those threads, using mana. At the same time, Ghislaine's hand glowed with blue mana. Ghislaine was sure someone of the attacker's skill would know how to patch himself up. He was completely unfazed. Ghislaine threatened that it wouldn't matter if he destroyed the attacker's mana core. The attacker looked absolutely shocked by what he heard. Ghislaine held the attacker's arm tightly, his mana flowing around it. The attacker looked absolutely terrified. The attacker realized his mana was scattering. He didn't understand how this was happening. Ghislaine asked if the attacker was out of his mind, warning that one wrong move could cause an explosion and blow everything away. He added that self-destruction was for the unskilled. Ghislaine replied that he could manage it. He looked completely calm, like there was nothing to worry about. The attacker realized Ghislaine wasn't bluffing. He was really going to do it. The attacker's eye reflected a terrible truth. He was about to die. He knew it was over. The attacker, on the verge of death, revealed everything. He blurted out that it was Count Desmond who had ordered the attack. He explained that Desmond needed a reason to start a war against the Perdium and Degard families. Ghislaine realized that it was Desmond. He thought to himself that in his previous life, this sort of dirty work was left to families allied with the ducal house. He wondered how Duke Delphine dared to orchestrate this nonsense behind the scenes. Ghislaine asked if that was why he wanted to kill Elena. The attacker, barely alive, could only nod in agreement. Ghislaine finished him The attacker, barely alive, could only nod in agreement. Ghislaine finished him off without hesitation. He looked down at the body, his eyes cold. The attacker coughed up blood, asking what Ghislaine was doing. He said this wasn't what he expected. He wondered if Ghislaine was scared, now that his own end was near. Ghislaine just stared down at him, a smirk playing on his lips. Ghislaine's eye twitched as he chuckled. The sound echoed in the air, a promise of pain to come. The attacker spat out that nothing would change, even if Ghislaine killed him. He claimed he'd already finished the work with with the Dagard. He asked if anyone would listen to a punk like Ghislaine, saying the Perdium would perish because of the war. Ghislaine stared back at him, his expression unreadable. Ghislaine raised his hand, ready to end the conversation. He had something to say. Ghislaine declared that he was reborn after dying, so things would be different this time. He looked absolutely sure of himself. The attacker screamed, his face contorted in fury as power surged around him. He looked like he was about to explode with energy, and immediately, a beam of pure energy shot straight up into the night sky. It ripped through the darkness, heading somewhere far above. The beam slammed into a building, sending chunks of stone flying everywhere. Ghislaine stood in front of the destruction, his eyes narrowed. The ground was littered with bodies, a grim reminder of the fight. Below, Ghislaine was panting heavily, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Ghislaine stood over Elena's body, his face stained with blood and sweat. He stared down at her, his expression unreadable as the night grew quiet. Ghislaine lay on the ground, struggling to catch his breath. Above him, his sword was stuck in the ground, covered in blood. Ghislaine's face was contorted in pain as he clenched his teeth. He was clearly not ready to give up. Ghislaine struggled to his feet, his body aching. He muttered that exploding 3 cores had been nothing back when he was the mercenary king. Ghislaine pushed himself up, his eyes burning with determination. He wouldn't fall here, not like this. Ghislaine glanced down at Elena's body, a sudden realization hitting him. He remembered that in his previous life, they had found another body, besides Elena, at this place. He recalled what the guy had said earlier. The leader in the black cloak turned away, his expression unreadable. Below him, the son of Dagard lay dead, covered in blood. The leader figured that the son of Dagard had been killed along with his escort knight, so that was how they silenced them and framed them as Elena's killers, huh? The leader realized that the moment this was revealed, the war would begin. He decided they needed to erase this evidence. The leader held a lighter in his hand, ready to burn everything. Ghislaine, carrying Elena, declared that he wouldn't let things happen as the leader intended. He had to protect Elena. Ghislaine ran as fast as he could, carrying Elena away from the chaos. The leader watched him go, his expression hidden by the shadows. The mission had been a total failure. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The leader was absolutely furious. He shouted, asking how they couldn't even take care of just one girl when he sent guard knights and Frank, who was supposed to be the best they had. He wondered if they let their guard down because they thought it would be easy. The subordinate stammered, trying to explain that it was all because of Ghislaine Perdium. He looked terrified of the leader's reaction. The leader scoffed, asking if he was talking about Ghislaine, that useless trash from the north. He asked if the subordinate was seriously trying to use him as an excuse, since everyone knew Ghislaine was a useless piece of garbage. The subordinate insisted that Ghislaine was completely different from the information and rumors they had. He seemed genuinely shocked by this. Ghislaine moved with incredible speed, his blade a blur as he cut through his enemies. He was a whirlwind of destruction, each strike precise and deadly. In the end, blood splattered across the ground, a testament to his power. The leader's face was a mask of disbelief as he realized something was very wrong. It was as if Ghislaine was a completely different person, and immediately, Ghislaine walked forward, seemingly unaffected by the chaos around him. The subordinate pleaded, saying they had already taken care of things with dragons, so starting the territorial war wouldn't be an issue. He begged for one more chance, but the leader cut him off, shouting that he couldn't even find out enough information on one kid. He asked if the subordinate realized how much of a setback this had caused, and how he dared ask for another chance after failing such an easy mission. The leader, his face twisted with rage, ordered the men to eliminate Ghislaine, and immediately, a cloaked figure knelt before him, ready to carry out the command. All this drama? Ghislaine thought it was too noisy. The leader paused for a moment, considering the situation. He slowly agreed, simply saying, yes. The leader stared down at the subordinate, his eyes burning with intensity. He demanded to know what kind of chance the guy wanted. The subordinate, desperate to redeem himself, shouted that he would get rid of Ghislaine Perdium, and immediately, he explained that he would make a duel happen naturally. The leader was curious, wondering who the subordinate had in mind. Down below, the other subordinates waited anxiously for the answer. The subordinate revealed that the person he had in mind was Kane Loops. He explained that Kane was famous for his self-created swordsmanship, and, despite his young age, had become a powerhouse. The subordinate added that he could confidently say that Kane was a monster in the north, and a match for the top strength. The subordinate added that Kane was also Ghislaine's cousin, so he was sure it wouldn't be hard to get them to meet. Below, the leader listened intently, waiting for him to continue. The leader's face was hidden in shadow, but his voice was clear. He warned the subordinate that if he failed again, the leader's eye glowed with a menacing light. He finished his warning, saying there wouldn't be a next time if he messed up again. The subordinate responded immediately, promising that he wouldn't disappoint the leader. Meanwhile, back at Perdium Castle, the training hall was quiet. The air was still, but that wouldn't last for long. An armored knight suddenly shouted, warning the young master that something was coming towards him. At the same time, a bright blue energy ball hurtled forward, leaving a trail of power behind it. Immediately, the knight prepared to strike, his sword glowing with the same blue energy. As a result, a blade of pure energy cut through the air, heading straight for the approaching ball. The knight's grip tightened around the sword, his knuckles white with tension. He focused all his power into that one swing, ready to meet the energy ball head on. Ghislaine stood in the training hall, watching the knight's display of power. He seemed impressed, but also a little surprised by what he had just witnessed. He muttered, "All right, that should do." Fergus approached the knight and said, "Oh, old man Fergus, sorry, you were so focused on your training." He paused, his curiosity getting the better of him. He asked, "How did you do that just now?" Ghislaine held up a glowing string of light, a strange look on his face. He asked, wondering what it was. Ghislaine explained that it was a mana thread, a way of using mana like a string. He looked closely at the glowing strands, his brow furrowed in thought. Ghislaine recalled that he used to use mana thread all the time in his past life, but with his current skill level, he would need to use too much mana to use it like he used to. Ghislaine realized that if he just made one thread to use less mana, he could still use it despite having less mana. A grin spread across his face as he figured it out. Fergus admitted that he thought he had trained his mana for a long time, but he had never seen anything like this. He was clearly impressed by Ghislaine's control. The man was stunned, he thought to himself, wondering how Ghislaine was suddenly able to use mana like that. Just a while ago, he didn't even train it. Ghislaine asked if the man wanted something from him. The man responded that he just wanted to stop by to say something. He seemed a little nervous. The knight thanked Ghislaine for protecting the young lady. Ghislaine replied that it was just something he should have done. He seemed a little embarrassed by the praise. Ghislaine suggested that they go eat. He was probably starving after all that fighting. A few days passed after that. The festival was paused, which made sense, since a guard knight tried to traffic the young lady. What a scumbag. Elena was getting annoyed. Everyone thought she was lying when she said Ghislaine was the one who saved her. She thought they should say something to them, but she knew it was fine, since they wouldn't believe them anyway. At the same time, other people sat around a table. Belinda realized it was Jamal and Philip who were trying to take Elena for themselves. Those scumbags. Belinda knew they were perverts. Below, Ghislaine thought about how Elena lived. Ghislaine had been able to stop the war from happening, but he was sure they wouldn't give up. He couldn't stop them on his own forever, so he realized he needed to grow a military force. Because of that, he knew he had to get more into politics. Ghislaine interrupted, excusing himself. He knew he had to get more into politics in order to do that. He'd have to get used to it fast. He was already getting pulled in different directions. Ghislaine was confused. He asked Belinda why they were getting dessert first. Belinda reminded him that he knew how their situation was. They had bigger problems than bread. A man lay on the ground in shock, probably from the recent events. At the same time, a man below yelled, demanding that they compensate the damages they had caused with the cancellation of the festival. A man was trying to calm down the crowd, but it was no use. The crowd was shouting, demanding compensation. They were saying that the people inside were swimming in money and should come out. Ghislaine looked out the window, confused. What the hell was going on out there? Belinda turned to Ghislaine, explaining that she knew they'd do this. She reminded him that their county was full of merchants who made a living from the profits that came from the festival, right? The crowd continued to shout. Since the festival was cancelled after just one day, it made sense that they were upset. Ghislaine looked worried. Was the county situation really that bad? This wasn't good at all. He realized that the crowd would only get more aggressive if he didn't do anything about it. Ghislaine turned to old man Fergus, demanding to know what the soldiers were doing. He ordered him to send them down to calm that crowd down. Fergus told him that they didn't have any soldiers. Ghislaine was shocked. Most of them had been sent to the Forest of Monsters for the reforestation because of the orc raid. Because of that, they were all there. Perdium was basically eternally at war because of the barbarians to the north. And on the other side, there was the Forest of Monsters from where monsters could come from at any moment. No money, no soldiers. What a mess, he thought. Ghislaine called out to Belinda, telling her that they needed to talk. He reminded her that she was the one that managed his money, right? He wanted to use that to calm down those merchants. Belinda looked right at him and said that there wasn't any money left. She didn't even try to soften the blow. Ghislaine asked her why not. Belinda reminded him that he'd been spending money like water, and the account was cut off. Ghislaine's eyes widened. He didn't have any money at all? He was broke? Ghislaine asked Belinda to lend him some money, but she just chuckled and said she didn't have any either. He should have seen that coming. Damn it, he thought. No money, no soldiers. What the hell did they have to work with? He sat by the window, looking out over the city, trying to figure out a solution. Without even a little bit of money, there was nothing he could do, even if he knew what was going to happen in the future. Ghislaine knew he was going to need money first. Someone came running, shouting about whether there wasn't something on the estate that could be sold, and immediately after, the door slammed open as Ricardo burst in, looking panicked. He was yelling for the young master. Ghislaine looked up, surprised. He asked Ricardo what was going on and why he was in such a hurry. It was rare to see him this worked up. Ricardo stammered, saying there was a problem. He announced that young Master Kane wanted to see Ghislaine. Ghislaine looked confused, repeating the name Kane to himself. Nearby, someone was getting beat up pretty badly. The guy's face was covered in blood, and he looked like he was about to pass out. The attacker's fist was covered in blood as he prepared to deliver the final blow. The impact would be devastating. The attacker's fist was covered in blood. He was clearly enjoying beating the crap out of this guy. The guy on the ground was barely conscious, just barely clinging to life. And immediately after, Ghislaine appeared in the doorway, looking down at the scene. The injured man on the ground managed to stammer out, "Young master?" Ghislaine's expression hardened as he took in the brutal scene. A voice cut through the air, cold and confident. Kane Loops had arrived, and he announced, "There you are." Kane Loops towered over Ghislaine, casting a long shadow. The air crackled with tension, and Ghislaine knew this wasn't going to be a friendly chat. Kane Loops stared down at Ghislaine with a smirk. He greeted him casually, saying, "Hey, Ghislaine." Ghislaine stared at Kane Loops and realized he knew that face. He thought to himself, turns out it was Kane Logis, the heir of the Logis County. They had an alliance with his family. Ghislaine thought back to his relationship with Kane. He had been his only friend at one time, and also his greatest enemy. The air was thick with tension as Ghislaine looked at Kane. He couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to happen. Ghislaine turned to Ricardo, asking what was going on. Ricardo stammered, you see, we responded to a report of a disturbance at the tavern." Ricardo explained that they found Kane Logis at the tavern with his escort knight. Kane recognized them and asked if the rumors about Ghislaine were true. So, Commander Scovan explained the details of the rumors to him. Kane grabbed the guy by the throat, lifting him off the ground. He demanded, "You dare lie before the heir of Logis?" Ricardo looked nervous. He muttered, and that was how it happened. The guy who got choked started talking. "Hey now, if you're gonna tell him, you better tell him the truth. He claimed that you, who's never even trained, took down an orc with your bare hands and dealt with the treacherous escort knights yourself. That's why I just gave him a little wake-up call to knock some sense into him." On the ground, the injured man groaned. Kane stared down at Ghislaine, clearly not happy. "This wouldn't have happened if you didn't lie in the first place," he said, his voice cold. Ghislaine was thinking about Kane. He had always treated him like he was less important. Every time Kane visited Perdium, he always made a mess. Even after causing all that trouble, no one could say anything, because Ghislaine was basically his subordinate. No one looked down upon Kane, but Ghislaine always had an inferiority complex. Kane's confidence and bold behavior were praised as qualities fitting of an heir. That's why Ghislaine was criticized more. He closed his eyes, remembering those harsh words. Ghislaine thought to himself, look at this guy, huh? Usually, Kane would have charged at him with this much provocation. We're going back in time a bit, to Logis County. It was a while ago. Someone asked, sounding surprised, "What? Kill Ghislaine?" The cloaked figure replied that if he succeeded in this task, the esteemed one would support the Logis family. The cloaked figure explained that it wasn't hard to deal with a punk like him, but Ghislaine was also an heir to his land, so they could lure Ghislaine into a duel, making it look like an accident. And immediately, he added that he would go with him as his escort knight to plan everything, so there was nothing to worry about. The cloaked figure said that this was a rare chance, even for him, but the muscular man was thinking about how he would have to kill his own cousin, Ghislaine. Kane Logis looked impatient and said that they should leave right away. Kane Logis wondered if they wanted to eliminate Ghislaine because something about him had changed. He was starting to get a bad feeling about this. Ghislaine, who was nearby, looked over and asked what was going on. While some guys were fighting in the background, Kane Logis demanded to know why the other man was standing still. He told him to bring the thing that had been prepared for him. Cain added that they should liven up the mood and have an amazing time. Cain Logis stared intensely and asked if he was wrong, buddy. Ghislaine stood there calmly, his hands casually tucked into his pockets. He seemed to be waiting for something to happen. Ghislaine started talking, remembering the past. He said that Cain Logis always had him prepare alcohol and women every time he came around. Below, the memory showed him being forced to do just that. Ghislaine was getting annoyed as he continued. He said that he only did it back then because he didn't want to get beaten up, but not anymore. The memory showed him being scolded for wasting so much money. Ghislaine's eyes narrowed, a sudden realization hitting him hard. He knew exactly what he needed to do. Ghislaine realized that his source of money had been right here all along. He stared down at the orb, a plan forming in his mind. Ghislaine heard someone calling his name. He looked up, wondering who was yelling at him. Cain Logis was sitting down and demanded that if Ghislaine remembered what he asked for, he better bring it to him right now. Cain seemed really impatient. Cain was still waiting, looking annoyed. He was clearly expecting Ghislaine to hurry up. Ghislaine looked up at Cain, a thought crossing his mind. But then he asked if Cain didn't have a debt to repay to him. Cain was confused and asked what he needed to repay him for. Ghislaine fired back, reminding Cain that he'd been paying for all the stuff Cain asked for with his own money. Ghislaine demanded 1,000 gold, principal plus interest. Cain was shocked, saying that it shouldn't have even cost him 100 gold. Cain Logis got right in Ghislaine's face, ranting about how he only kept doing all those favors because he thought they were friends. He said it was like he was paying some friendship fee. He was furious that he had been used like a doormat for so long. Ghislaine glared at Cain, telling him to pay it all back before he beat the crap out of him. He said he was short on cash and needed the money right now. The words caused a commotion. People started fighting around them, unsure what was happening. Ricardo watched the scene unfold, confused, and asked what the young masters were doing. Cain stepped on the hand of someone on the ground. He asked Ghislaine if he was starting to act all tough, just because he'd been going easy on him. Cain looked down on Ghislaine, sneering that he seemed to think he could spread rumors about a knight. He called Ghislaine a parasite leeching off the land, and said that everyone in the north knew he was a scoundrel who only sucked up to his heir, talking garbage. Cain Logis yelled at Ghislaine to get himself together, and immediately he swung his fist down towards Ghislaine's face, ready to beat him up. Ghislaine leaned back, dodging Cain's punch at the last second. He watched Cain carefully, trying to figure out what he was going to do next. Cain screamed that Ghislaine was a little before throwing another punch, but Ghislaine blocked the attack with his arm, stopping Cain from hitting him. Ghislaine didn't waste any time and punched Cain right in the face. The force of the hit made Cain's head snap back. Cain's eyes widened in shock as he got punched. He didn't expect that at all. The punch connected with Cain's face, and you could practically feel the force behind it. At the bottom, Ghislaine stood there, staring back with cold eyes. Cain was sent flying, crashing onto the ground with a thud. At the same time, one of Cain's men rushed over, yelling to see if the young master was okay. Ghislaine towered over Cain, telling him to get up and stop whining. He knew Cain had blocked the hit, so he wasn't buying the act. One of Cain's men shouted at Ghislaine to stand back, asking what he thought he was doing. Meanwhile, the other guys there were just as shocked, wondering if Ghislaine had really just beaten up Cain. Cain smirked, his eyes narrowing. So, that's how Ghislaine wanted to play things, huh? The speaker smirked, asking Ghislaine how he liked his acting. Ghislaine just looked at him, waiting for the next move. The speaker grinned, saying it was excellent. He had set the stage perfectly to make it appear that the fault lay with Ghislaine in everyone's eyes. This should be more than enough to justify a duel. Of course, it was a rare opportunity to gain such powerful backing, and he had to make sure to leave a lasting impression this time. At the top, the scene showed two men talking about how if he succeeded in this task, the esteemed one would support the Logis family. Meanwhile, the speaker clenched his fist, thinking this was the perfect time to cut off Perdium, a falling power. Cain shouted, asking how Ghislaine dared to attack him simply for trying to verify the truth, after tarnishing the dignity of nobility with lies. And immediately after, the view shifted to Ghislaine on the ground. Ghislaine looked down at Cain, who was still on the ground, and accepted the challenge. He challenged Cain Logis to a duel. Cain Logis accused Ghislaine of insulting him, the heir, in front of the people of Perdium, and he was also furious about the assault on his knight, saying that Ghislaine had tarnished the dignity of nobility. Meanwhile, his knight was still on the ground, clearly in bad shape. Cain stared intensely at Ghislaine, His eyes narrowed. He asked if Ghislaine was thinking of denying what he had done. The air was thick with tension. Everyone watched Ghislaine, waiting to see what he would say or do. Ghislaine chuckled, a nasty smile spreading across his face. He already knew Cain was stupid, but he didn't know he was stupid enough to dig his own grave. So, he accepted the duel. Below, his hand gripped the hilt of his sword. Cain smirked. Looking down at Ghislaine, he warned him not to regret it, even if he died. Ghislaine stared down at Ricardo, his blue eyes piercing. He needed to get things moving. Below, Ricardo responded nervously, confirming that he understood. Ricardo took a deep breath and shouted, his voice echoing through the area. He was going to carry out Ghislaine's orders, no matter what. Ghislaine looked down, a sly grin on his face. He told Ricardo to bring all the merchants protesting in front of the castle, promising to make them big money. The festival was suddenly cancelled. The atmosphere, which had been so hyped up, cooled down just as quickly. Some tourists couldn't even leave because of it, which really sucked for them. They were stuck in a state of frustration, unable to spend their money or enjoy their time. Ghislaine knew that something had to be done to help the tourists. He figured that if an event were to take place, it would definitely soothe them. Ghislaine stood tall on the platform, looking out at the crowd. He was about to make an announcement. The crowd went wild, announcing that it was a duel between young Master Cain and Ghislaine. They were betting their money on young Master Cain, hoping that he would finally teach that punk a lesson. The merchants were doing everything they could to make a sale. They were shouting that their goods were cheap, and they were offering a buy one, get one free deal. The betting promoter was yelling for everyone to place their bets, trying to hype up the duel. At the same time, coins were flying through the air as people rushed to bet on young Master Cain, since it was supposedly the safest bet. Young Master Cain was furious, saying that it was wrong to turn a sacred duel into a marketplace like this. He then warned that his sword wouldn't stop, not even if his opponent surrendered. Ghislaine listened to what Cain said, a slight smirk forming on his face. It seemed like that was exactly what he wanted to hear. Ghislaine announced that, since it seemed like enough people were satisfied, they could begin. The crowd waited with bated breath. The betting promoter looked down at his papers, looking bummed out. Turns out, nobody had bet their money on Duke Ghislaine, which was probably not a good sign for him. Ghislaine stared forward, lost in thought. He was probably thinking about the fight, or maybe he was just bored. The betting promoter yelled that the result was obvious, and that Ghislaine didn't stand a chance against young Master Cain. He then told everyone to find an idiot dumb enough to bet on the other side. The promoter turned to Ghislaine, smirking. He told him that even the marketplace was ignoring him. The promoter suggested changing the conditions of the bet. He proposed that people bet on how long Ghislaine could last against young Master Cain. As a result, a guy threw a bag of money on the table. A man in armor put his money on the line. He announced that he was betting on Duke Ghislaine. The air crackled with anticipation as the duel was about to begin. Below, a massive bag of money sat on the table, representing the stakes of the upcoming fight. Suddenly, Lady Elena spoke up, announcing that she wanted to bet on her big brother, too. Beside her, Belinda watched with a small smile. Ghislaine looked shocked, clearly surprised that Lady Elena was getting involved. Below, one of the men looked back at her, equally surprised. Lady Elena declared that the money should be enough. She reminded them that she had advised against this whole thing. Young Master Cain, at the bottom, looked annoyed that he had to wait. Young Master Cain told Ghislaine to get ready. He said that since he was older, it'd be strange for him to make the first move. Ghislaine just stared back, holding his sword. Ghislaine gripped his sword tightly. He was ready to face whatever came next. Ghislaine raised his sword high, ready to strike. He was focused on his opponent. Ghislaine stared down at Cain. His eyes narrowed. At the same time, Cain glared back, equally intense. Ghislaine held his sword steady, ready to fight. He told Cain that it was too late for him to act like the older one now. Cain charged forward with incredible speed. The force of his movement stirred up the air around him. Ghislaine swung his sword down with incredible force. Cain struggled to defend himself, barely managing to block the blow. Cain's eyes showed pure fear. He knew he was in trouble. Ghislaine stared down at Cain, his face twisted in anger. He told Cain that he had already stooped too low to save face now. Meanwhile, Cain struggled to block Ghislaine's relentless attacks. Ghislaine didn't let up, swinging his sword again and again. Cain barely managed to keep up, blocking each strike with a desperate parry. Ghislaine's sword moved like lightning, each strike carrying immense power. Cain was pushed back further and further, struggling to stay on his feet. The crowd was going wild, cheering for young Master Cain. They were sure that Ghislaine wouldn't even be able to land a single hit. Cain was smirking, clearly enjoying the attention. A man asked Lady Elena what they should do. saying they had to stop the duel right away. But Elena said it was too late. Anyone who dared cross swords with Cain was already trapped. Cain was moving fast, forcing Ghislaine to block each strike. At the same time, someone explained that Cain's opponents were always overwhelmed by his power. They would use all their energy just trying to dodge. The exhausted opponent, after dodging for a while, would eventually leave an opening, and as a result, they would meet their end, beaten on the ground. Cain was still smiling, confident as ever. He told Ghislaine that his skills had actually improved from before. Ghislaine readied his sword, realizing that Cain's movements actually made sense. He was starting to understand Cain's strategy. Cain attacked, taunting Ghislaine, telling him that he was always good at running away, even back in the old days. He seemed to be enjoying himself a lot. Ghislaine was sent flying into the air from the force of the blow. He had no chance to defend himself. At the same time, a man in the crowd shouted, "Young master!" But from below, Cain declared it was over for Ghislaine. He was sure of his victory. Cain brought his foot down, shouting that Ghislaine would die right there. The ground cracked from the force of the impact, and Ghislaine's face was filled with pain. Ghislaine looked down at Cain, ready to strike. He thought that he wanted to go easy on him. Ghislaine came down on Cain with his sword. He shouted that Cain had crossed the line. Ghislaine landed on his feet, his eyes narrowed in determination. He was ready to continue the fight. Ghislaine had recovered, using mana to steady himself. Below, a man in the crowd looked on in disbelief. He wondered if Ghislaine had really managed to return to a stable state by condensing mana into his legs. Cain looked down at Ghislaine with a smirk. He said that Ghislaine's swordsmanship was ignorant. He must have thought he was the strongest just because his opponents got scared if he showed even a little bit of his strength, huh? Meanwhile, the crowd watched on, unsure of what would happen next. Ghislaine held his sword out, telling Cain that he was going to open his eyes. But Cain wasn't impressed. He asked how Ghislaine planned on doing that. Ghislaine didn't waste any time. He immediately swung his sword down at Cain, moving so fast that the air cracked. Their swords met with a deafening crash. The force of it sent splinters of wood flying from the floor. Cain was sent flying back, barely managing to block the blow. He gritted his teeth against the pain. Despite the setback, Cain recovered quickly. He clashed with Ghislaine again, their swords sparking with each hit. Ghislaine screamed at the top of his lungs, putting everything he had into the swing. He was going to make sure Cain didn't get up again. Ghislaine's sword came down on Cain with incredible force. At the same time, someone watching the fight thought it looked like a video game. Ghislaine stared down at his opponent. His eyes narrowed. He wasn't going to let up, not even for a second. Ghislaine stood over Cain, his sword still raised, and immediately, Cain was on the ground, barely able to move. Cain was lying on the ground, bleeding and bruised. His sword was next to him, useless. It was over. The crowd couldn't believe what they were seeing. They were shouting about how Duke Ghislaine had improved so much. One of them was regretting his bet, since he had put his money on Master Cain. At the top, Lady Elena watched the fight with Belinda, the maid. Down below, Cain was lying on the ground, his face full of pain and frustration. Ghislaine was thinking that the wound wasn't deep enough. He wondered if he had done it on purpose. Cain was still on the ground, bleeding. Ghislaine wondered how he could have shown such a high level of swordsmanship. It was like he had been training for this his entire life. Ghislaine stood over Cain, his sword at the ready. He was completely focused on the fight, ready to end it once and for all. Ghislaine thought that such a gap in skill wouldn't provide enough entertainment, and immediately after, his sword clattered to the ground, joining the others that had been knocked from their owner's hands. Ghislaine looked over at Cain and announced that he'd be fighting barehanded from now on. He seemed pretty serious about it. Cain looked absolutely shocked, his face twisted in disbelief. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, and he thought that he should use the opportunity to teach Ghislaine a lesson. Ghislaine smirked and started rolling up his sleeve, showing off his bare knuckles. He was ready to fight, no sword needed. Ghislaine stared down at Cain with a look of utter confidence. He asked if Cain was really going to educate him. Ghislaine started rolling up his sleeve, his eyes never leaving Cain. He told him that it seemed like Cain was no match for him with swords, so he'd give him a handicap and fight barehanded, which Cain was good at. Ghislaine declared that he'd bet 2,000 more gold that he'd win. Down below, the crowd was in shock. They couldn't believe that Ghislaine would bet that much. The man watching was stunned. He couldn't believe that Ghislaine would challenge Cain to a barehanded fight. He was grateful for Ghislaine's insanity, and he thought that fortune was on their side. The announcer shouted for everyone to place their additional bets, reminding them that the event was now a barehanded fight between Ghislaine and Cain. Meanwhile, some in the crowd were saying that they were going to bet on Cain because challenging him in sheer force was just stupid. But this time, they seemed to think Cain had a chance. The crowd was getting rowdy. and the bets were flying in. One guy shouted that he was putting his money on young Lord Gizlen. Young Master Kane was still on the ground, but he was laughing. He thought the idea of a bare-handed fight was hilarious. Gizlen dropped the swords to the ground. He was ready to fight without a weapon, just like he promised. And immediately, young Master Kane was sent flying. He was thrown into the air like a rag doll. Young Master Kane shouted that he was going to use the sword. Turns out, he was lying about the bare-handed thing. The crowd was getting restless. A woman with white hair yelled that young Lord Gizlen was an asshole and should pick up his sword. The blonde woman beside her seemed to agree. Young Lord Gizlen looked down at young Master Kane, his eyes cold. He muttered that he was going to knock some sense into him. Young Lord Gizlen didn't waste any time. He swung the sword with all his might, the blade whistling through the air. The sword slammed into young Master Kane. The force of the blow sent him flying backwards, crashing into the ground. Young Lord Gizlen stood over young Master Kane, who was now lying motionless on the ground. He stared down at the guy, not showing a single bit of mercy. Young Lord Gizlen was fast. He dodged the clumsy attack with ease, twisting his body to avoid the blow. And immediately, he countered with a strike of his own. The headbutt landed with a sickening crack. Because of that, blood sprayed from young Master Kane's forehead as he staggered backwards. Blood poured down young Master Kane's face. He was clearly hurt badly. Young Master Kane groaned in pain. He had lost the fight. Young Master Kane was lying on the ground, looking up in disbelief. At the same time, one of the spectators watched from above, wondering how young Lord Gizlen could move like that. Young Master Kane was down, but not out. At least, that's what young Lord Gizlen thought. He looked down at his opponent and taunted him, telling him to get up because he hadn't even gotten started yet. Young Master Kane was furious. He was not going to let this punk beat him. He was ready to keep fighting, no matter how much it hurt. Young Master Kane swung his sword with all his might. He was desperate to land a hit, any hit, on young Lord Gizlen. The two men clashed again, swords meeting with a loud clang. Sparks flew as they traded blows, each trying to gain the upper hand. Young Lord Gizlen fought with a renewed vigor, pushing young Master Kane back. He told him that he couldn't even look him in the eyes until now, and that he used to bow down whenever he showed up. As a result, young Master Kane was knocked to the ground again, defeated. Young Lord Gizlen didn't hold back. He swung his sword down with all his force, ready to end this fight once and for all. The blow was aimed straight at young Master Kane, and there was no way he could dodge it. Young Master Kane was lying on the ground, defeated and covered in blood, but he wasn't giving up just yet. He spat out blood and said that he had to kill young Lord Gizlen to secure their Logs family's future. The force of the blows kept hitting young Master Kane over and over. Each strike was like a hammer, crushing him further into the ground. He couldn't even move, much less defend himself. Young Master Kane was a mess. Blood was everywhere, and he was barely conscious. He was just lying there, taking it. It was a brutal end to what was supposed to be a fair fight. Young Master Kane was barely alive. He looked up at young Lord Gizlen with a mix of confusion and pain. He managed to croak out one last word. Why? Young Master Kane was getting pummeled. Each strike was worse than the last, and he could barely see straight. Young Master Kane was still being hit. He was a brutal mess. At the same time, young Lord Gizlen was remembering something. He thought that he pitied Kane's father, Count Loges. Count Loges had helped Perdium until it was almost destroyed, just because he was friends with Gizlen's father. Young Lord Gizlen thought that Kane's father was a good man. However, his son had a different plan in his head. Meanwhile, young Master Kane was still taking a beating. Young Lord Gizlen remembered a few years before. He remembered when Kane was sending more support to Perdium. Young Lord Gizlen remembered someone saying that even if they were friends with Count Perdium, they were having a hard time themselves. Why would they continue to invest in a land that was dying? It was like pouring water into a cracked bucket. It hadn't even been a week since his return, but he was already going back to help Perdium? Young Master Kane begged his father, Count Loges, not to go. He was desperate to get him to listen. Count Loges just looked down at his son, not responding. Count Loges' son, young Master Kane, asked why he insisted on helping Perdium when everyone was trying to stop him. He couldn't understand why his father was so stubborn. Meanwhile, young Master Kane was still lying on the ground, beaten. Young Master Kane's face was a mess. Blood dripped from his nose and mouth, and his eyes were swollen shut. Young Lord Gizlen struck down on young Master Kane. He made sure to hit him hard. There was no other reason for Count Loges to help Perdium, he thought. Young Lord Gizlen stood over young Master Kane, who was lying on the ground, completely defeated. He said that this should have taught him enough. Young Master Kane's face was a mess. He could barely see, and and his head was spinning. Young Lord Gizlan reached down, offering a hand to young Master Kane. He told him to get up. Young Lord Gizlan's hand hovered there, waiting, but young Master Kane refused to take it, his face a mask of pain and shame. Young Master Kane finally spoke, his voice hoarse. He admitted his defeat to young Lord Gizlan. The crowd was stunned into silence by the outcome of the duel. At the same time, hidden in the shadows, a masked man watched with narrowed eyes. The crowd erupted in cheers, celebrating young Lord Gizlan's win. People were shouting about winning their bets, while others were in disbelief. The blonde little girl jumped for joy, happy that her big bro had won the duel. The hooded man towered over young Master Kane, who was still kneeling on the ground. He was furious. He yelled at young Master Kane, asking how he could give up so easily, especially since he had trusted him. The hooded man grabbed young Master Kane roughly. Young Master Kane told him to let go, saying he was done. The hooded man scoffed, calling him a weak little brat. Young Lord Gizlan was smiling, which made the hooded man narrow his eyes. He realized that young Lord Gizlan was about to do something, but he had no idea what. Young Lord Gizlan raised his voice, addressing everyone. He announced that he was volunteering to pay for all the meat and drinks for everyone gathered there. The hooded man looked at him like he was crazy, wondering what he was up to. The crowd went wild, shouting about meat and drinks. They cheered for young Lord Gizlan, who'd promised them a feast. But the hooded man was furious. He told him he didn't agree to any of this, and demanded that young Lord Gizlan take back his words. Young Lord Gizlan calmly explained that this was the price for losing the duel. He added that the money for the meat and drinks shouldn't be deducted from the bet. He also reminded him to add 2,000 gold to the original bet of 1,000 gold. Meanwhile, the hooded man looked absolutely furious. Young Lord Gizlan stared down at the hooded man, warning him that he knew what would happen if he ran away. The air was thick with tension. The hooded man's eye widened in fear. He was clearly terrified of what young Lord Gizlan would do to him. The hooded man knelt down, finally understanding the situation. He mumbled that he understood, completely defeated. The next day, the castle stood tall against the morning sky. The town was slowly waking up after the previous night's events. Meanwhile, inside young Lord Gizlan's room, sunlight streamed in through the window. At the same time, on the table, lay the spoils of his victory, a mountain of gold coins. Young Lord Gizlan stared at the gold, his eyes wide. He couldn't believe how much money he had just won. Young Lord Gizlan thought to himself that he could hire a small mercenary group with that much money, but he knew it took too long to grow money, and they wouldn't wait for him. He needed to prepare faster to realize the business he had in mind. Suddenly, Elena asked what was up. She wanted to know where young Lord Gizlan planned on spending all that money. Belinda, the maid, stood beside her, also curious. Elena asked if he wanted some of the gold, but Belinda interrupted, saying she was just asking and that it was obvious where he'd use it. Belinda pointed out that it was Lady Amelia's birthday soon. She teased young Lord Gizlan, suggesting he put on such a show because he wanted to buy her a very expensive present. She added that he was so transparent and was just doing all that to look good to his fiancée. Young Lord Gizlan sat there, stunned. He asked if he had a fiancé. Down below, Elena and Belinda didn't let up. They teased him, saying he didn't have to be shy since they knew he was planning something, because he was embarrassed that they read his mind. They were talking about Amelia from Rayfold County. Young Lord Gizlan's eyes widened as it hit him. He finally understood. Suddenly, a dark image flashed in his mind. That woman, Amelia Rayfold. He remembered Amelia Rayfold as a noble among nobles, known for her kind nature and actions towards everyone, regardless of status. She had gained the deep support of the people in her territory. However, he also knew she would later incite rebellion and become known as the Witch of the North. Young Lord Gizlan's face twisted in fury. She had joined hands with the Delphine Duchy to drive the final nail into Peridium's downfall. A traitor, Belinda asked when her father would be returning, wondering if it would be soon. But Gizlan was already thinking ahead. A week, huh? That should be enough time, he figured. Gizlan suddenly announced that he would be visiting Rayfold County. Belinda was taken by surprise and asked why, since it wasn't even Amelia's birthday yet. Gizlan stated plainly that he was going to get money from them. It was all about the gold. She stared down at the shoes, carefully considering which ones to wear. It was an important decision. Belinda stared intently and told them to wear those shoes. She didn't take her eyes off them. The barefoot child looked up at her, tears in their eyes. "Lady Amelia," they stammered out. Amelia's expression hardened with resolve. She declared that if anyone had to walk around barefoot on her land, it should be her. Amelia ordered her guards to provide food and shelter for them right away. And right away, the people began hauling supplies, moving with a new sense of purpose. Amelia walked forward, her guards flanking her. All around, people kept thanking her, their voices filled with genuine emotion. Rayfold County, Amelia's garden. It was a place of peace. Amelia sat there with a man, the chaos of the outside world fading away. Burnoff was carefully cleaning Amelia's feet. He mentioned that his father had always demanded everyone in his territory obey him without question. Amelia gently petted the cat, its purrs filling the air. Burnoff continued, saying that people would always follow the one who took care of them, keeping them safe and happy. With this, she'd won their hearts. Amelia's face was serious, her expression unreadable, and right away, Burnoff was sent flying by a kick. Amelia looked at Burnoff with curiosity. She asked him what exactly had happened during his duel against the finest sword of the North. Burnoff apologized, explaining that he had avoided winning the duel to prevent unwanted attention. He added that if he were to stand victorious, people might start paying attention to Amelia. It wasn't yet the time to reveal her claws. Burnoff held Amelia's foot, bringing it close to his face. He said that his blade was hers, adding that he had invested so much to raise her. Amelia grabbed Burnoff's face, her fingers digging into his skin. She warned him that he wasn't allowed to be weak. The man asked about how things were going with the merchants. He explained that if she was talking about the Arctium Merchants Guild, there was no need to worry, because all the materials used for the reconstruction of the Perdium Defense Outpost were being purchased through their merchant guild. Basically, they were recouping all the surplus funds that Count Rayfold sent to Perdium each year. The man continued, saying that they were also recruiting all the soldiers and knights leaving Perdium. He added that many of them were well trained from battles against the barbarian tribes, making them excellent quality. Amelia said that was good, repeating that they needed to maintain the appearance of an ordinary merchant guild and be thorough. She warned that they couldn't let their true identity be exposed until they had fully built up their strength. Before excusing herself, a guard was blocking the stairs, but another man insisted on passing. He explained that the lady was resting and demanded to know who had allowed him to enter. The other guard replied that he had just gotten word from the gate that young Lord Ghislaine Perdium had arrived for a visit. Amelia's face twisted in anger when she heard the news. She wondered what that punk wanted. The guard looked up, stammering, clearly nervous about her reaction. The guard quickly added that Ghislaine claimed he wanted to discuss something about the merchant guild. He hoped this would calm her down. The guard led Ghislaine to the visitor's room. It was lavishly decorated, showing off Amelia's wealth. Ghislaine was already waiting inside, sitting casually on the couch. He greeted Amelia with a smile, saying hello. Amelia was clearly annoyed by Ghislaine's unannounced visit. She told him that this was quite unpleasant and asked if he hadn't learned any manners yet. Down below, Ghislaine remained on the couch. Ghislaine smirked, ignoring Amelia's coldness. He said that it was going to be her birthday soon, so he thought he'd give her the gift in advance. Ghislaine picked up a flower from the merchant guild up ahead, saying that the fragrance was quite nice. He added that he planned to buy flowers from there from now on. Meanwhile, Amelia was holding her cat. Ghislaine asked if the name of the merchant guild was the Arctium Merchant Guild. Below, Amelia glared back at him. Amelia said she wasn't sure what Ghislaine was trying to say. Now that she had received his gift, she'd be off. She said goodbye. Ghislaine watched her leave while taking a sip of his tea. Amelia wasn't messing around. She stared down at Ghislaine with cold eyes. She told him to sit down. Amelia felt a strange pressure coming from him. It was unreal. She thought to herself, wondering how this was coming from the same guy who used to squirm and barely speak whenever he stood in front of her. Ghislaine didn't waste any time. He said that they should get straight to the point and that he needed some money right now. He demanded that she give him 10,000 gold. Amelia looked at him, shocked. Ghislaine said that visiting and going somewhere were quite different from a large kingdom from her fiancé. Amelia fired back, saying that her father had nothing to do with this and that he should just give it to her. She asked if he wasn't planning to marry her anyway. Amelia stared intensely at Ghislaine. She was trying to figure out what he was up to. Amelia explained that if Ghislaine became the lord of the land, taking her escort knight would be more than possible. But before that, he should build up his power secretly in Rayfold, where the fight for succession was fierce. As she spoke, the cat lying lying next to Ghislaine, suddenly opened its eyes wide, looking like it was ready to attack. Ghislaine just sat there, the cat now a silent, watchful presence beside him. He didn't say a word. Amelia warned him that he shouldn't say something like that, not even as a joke. She said she would keep it a secret for a bit, but then she added that she might need to keep those words if she left the room empty-handed. She said that wasn't going to happen. Amelia suddenly shouted for Burnoff. The heavy doors to the room swung open. Burnoff walked into the room, looking directly at Ghislaine. He said it had been a while. Young Lord Ghislaine. Burnoff, the guy who was always at Amelia's side, was now standing before Ghislaine. He was a skilled person, said to be as good as the finest sword of the north. Ghislaine warned that if he died there, a war might break out. He asked if they were sure they could handle that. Amelia replied that of course they could. She explained that the world would hear that a sudden ruffian barged in, caused chaos, and was killed by the hand of the escort knight. Amelia ordered Burnoff to kill Ghislaine right there. Burnoff simply said, "As you wish, my lady." Ghislaine realized that was how they wanted to play. He paused for a moment. Ghislaine realized that he had no choice but to get a little serious.